Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jane Hewitt and I'm the Capability Building Coordinator at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand are part of the Info Exchange Group, a not-for-profit social enterprise that tackles the biggest social challenges through the smart and creative use of technology. And for those of you who haven't attended a webinar session with us before, Connecting Up and TechSoup facilitate an annual training calendar of online webinars, workshops and boot camps to help the social sector upskill in all things digital. And you can check out our training and education calendar on both of the websites. So welcome today to Cybersecurity, Reduce Risk While Increasing Impact with Ian Patterson from Human IT. And before we begin, we'll just start with a bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, so if you have any technical issues, please type them into the questions box on your GoToWebinar panel and I'll be able to assist. And likewise, if you have any questions for Ian during the session, please do type them into the questions box and we'll do a short Q&A at the end of the webinar. And if you're on a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and the video. So please, if possible, close any that you're not using. And please note this webinar is being recorded and you'll be receiving a copy of the slides and the recording at the end of today. And just before we start, I'd like to remind everybody that we do a quick survey that pops up right at the end of the webinar and we'd really appreciate any feedback. So that's all from me. I'll pass over to Ian to get things started.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Jane. Wonderful introduction. Thank you, everybody, for making time to be here this morning. We have a lot to cover. And cybersecurity is a really complex and really important area at the moment. And before we get into what we'll be talking about today, I thought it'd be really interesting to take a bit of a poll. Jane, if you could pop the poll up. What we're looking to just get a bit of an indication of is how challenging or simple do you find cybersecurity? So in the first instance, cybersecurity could be confusing. So that is, it's difficult to understand and hard to figure out what to do. Sometimes it's just challenging, you know, everyone's clear on what to do, but actually getting the changes made is really quite challenging. And other organisations find it quite straightforward. They're following a proven way to increase their cyber resilience. So, Dan, if we pop that poll up on there now, if everyone could take a couple of minutes and just give us some feedback as to which of those three areas you fall into, that'd be very helpful.
Yeah, we're just waiting for a few more people to vote. We've got about 40% who voted, so everybody can get clicking. I don't know if you can see that, Ian. Can you see the results on your screen?
Actually, can't see the results.
Okay, so we've got confusing 25%, challenging 75%.
Okay. Yep, excellent. So that's really interesting because we run this question. We've asked this question several times over the last 12 months, and the results are shifting from it being confusing to less confusing but very challenging, through to more people actually getting a handle on cybersecurity. So thanks everybody. Yeah, appreciate the heads up on that. For today's session, we're going to cover essentially three components of cybersecurity. Firstly, we're going to demystify cybersecurity. It's complex. Everyone has a different starting position in terms of maturity when it comes to tackling cybersecurity. So we're going to start with some really basic concepts around demystifying and defining cybersecurity, and then we're going to walk through what actions you can take to defend your organisation and build your cyber resilience. And then we're going to give you some practical tools and steps that you can use along with your journey. So let's dive into it. Okay, so firstly, what's happening in the cybersecurity space? There's been some notable events, and there's three examples here from the news, really three key events since about June last year. And if you cast your mind back to about the middle of last year, there was a significant cyber attack on Australia that included the private sector, government sector, a number of our institutions. And that was the most sophisticated attack we've seen launched against Australia in a long, long time. You fast forward from June to about January this year, the federal government announced a $1.7 billion cybersecurity strategy. That was off the back of that massive attack in June. And the cybersecurity strategy was really aimed at helping Australia, both government and the private sector, defend against quite sophisticated threats. And as recently as 2 weeks ago, you may recall that Microsoft were compromised globally, and Australia's impact from that was there was about 7,000 servers in Australia which were potentially compromised. That's not going away, unfortunately. It's a terrible thing we have to deal with cybersecurity, and we're expecting more of these sorts of sizable events to occur in the future. So overall, what we're seeing is that cyber attacks are increasing in frequency and also sophistication. So at the moment, the Australian Cybersecurity Centre is reporting about one cybersecurity attack or breach every 10 minutes. So there was 164 reports made by Australians every day. And if you look at the 6 months up to the end of last year, the Australian Cybersecurity Centre responded to 2,266 incidents and received almost 60,000 cyber reports. So it's rampant. Organisations have been attacked on a regular basis. And the biggest threat we're seeing at the moment is ransomware, which is a piece of malicious software which is being used to essentially lock up an organisation's systems and data, and then the criminals are asking for a ransom in return for their release. So massive disruption gets in the way of what we just love doing, which is providing value as a not-for-profit. But it's not going away, and we do need to figure out how we deal with it. When these attacks are happening, there's massive disruption to the operations of an organisation. And we'll circle back to what you can do to really mitigate against that. But in addition to an attack impacting your ability to deliver services, there are also a number of other costs that relate to cybercrime. And if you think about why it's so important, at the end of the day, we have a duty of care to protect the information for the people that we serve, and to make sure this information is treated appropriately and is not compromised, and therefore can't do harm to those people. You also have a duty of care to the organisations you're working for to keep trust with your market, your beneficiaries, your funders. And cybercrime and cyber breaches can really get in the way of impacting that trust if you're not ready to respond. So if we think about those two elements in terms of data breaches, there's a couple of really significant costs. The first one is brand reputation costs. So some of these stats are a little bit old, but they're still very relevant today. From a brand reputation perspective, 94% of Australian consumers believe that that trust is more important than convenience. So when we're thinking about should we increase our security, but that's going to impact the user experience, the experience that our beneficiaries receive as part of our services. Yep, absolutely it may, but bear in mind that trust is more important than convenience, as reported in 94% of cases by Deloitte. 89% of consumers would avoid doing business with companies that do not protect their privacy. And 60% of Australians have decided not to deal with a company due to privacy concerns. So the reputational damage of not being able to respond to a cyber attack or a data breach are certainly significant. The other factor is lost revenue. And so in addition to your operations being disrupted by an attack, if the attack results in a breach of data, on average, it costs about $158 per record in remediation services. And at the end of that, about 23% churn of customers or beneficiaries there. So the cost is significant, and certainly those costs are what driving many organisations at the moment to take cybersecurity really very seriously, from a governance perspective right through to an operational perspective. So we'll start off with some basics. And firstly, who are the cyber criminals? It's great to get a bit of an understanding about, well, who are launching these attacks and what do they want? And we find with cyber criminals, there are essentially two types of criminal. So firstly, there are the lone actors. So single actor or a very small group of people, primarily motivated by financial gain. And there's really three activities that they're getting involved in. The first is a bounty hunter, someone who will look on the dark web for paid opportunities. There are markets for obtaining illegal information, where an organisation might say, we're after this specific bit of information. They'll put that on the dark web and offer a bounty for someone to go and get that information. Other lone actors look to take small sums from thousands of credit cards. That's becoming less and less frequent, but still is a current threat. And others use ransomware to lock up systems and demand a ransom. The other more serious cyber criminal are what the government terms advanced persistent threats. So this is cyber espionage. It's been linked to a number of groups with affiliations to state-based sponsorship. To name a few, Iran, China, and Russia tend to sort of pop their heads up a fair bit. And these are state-backed, very well-resourced groups with an intention to essentially wreak havoc on our government, on our institutions, and the private sector. And if you look at what these criminals want, there's really a very broad spectrum, which is why cybercrime is so confusing. At one end of the spectrum, you've got optimistic criminals who will take advantage of Australian companies for financial gain. They're the more bounty hunters. And at the other end of the spectrum, we've got these advanced persistent threats. And what they're looking for are two very different things. I think the average consumer and many organisations get caught up in cyber attacks, not necessarily being the intended victim of those attacks. So in the first instance, what the criminals are after is your trust relationships. So this is where you become collateral damage. You might have your computer that's compromised. The hacker's not after your information. What they're after is, well, who do you know within the organisation you work with, or where are you buying from? And they start to build out a network of relationships so they can get to the next point up the chain. Other cyber criminals are actually very keen on attacking specific organisations, and we've seen this across healthcare and small to medium businesses, because they are less well equipped to defend against cyber security threats, especially the SMB sector. And these criminals are very much out for financial gain. So that's what they'll use, credit card fraud or ransomware to really, get payment from you. We'll stop for some questions halfway through, but I'll cover a few more concepts around attacks first. So now that we know what cyber criminals look like, I wanted to cover off three attacks. There's three predominant attacks, so we get a bit of a sense of, well, what do cyber attacks actually look like? And the three that we're going to cover off today are phishing attacks. We're also going to look at malware, and then also corporate email compromises. So phishing attacks are significant, and we'll go into some stats around these shortly, but phishing attacks rely on, this is where you get an email that looks legitimate. It may be, you've got a parcel that's arrived, or Microsoft needs you to log back in and re-authenticate. What they're really looking for there is for you to enter your details, so they can take advantage of those. This has been a really effective way for criminals to get access to data. As an example, a hacker might gain access to someone's personal email. They might take over a legitimate conversation within that email and forward on to one of your friends or a peer with some malware attached to that email. and that email is likely to get through because the person knows you, it looks like it's come from you, and therefore they will open the attachment. The second attack, which is really prevalent these days, is malware and ransomware. So malware is malicious code that's designed to compromise a computer system, and it's usually delivered via an email or by clicking a link to an unsafe website, and it downloads the malware. Malware is the predominant way that systems get compromised, and the malware can be designed to do a number of horrific things to really take down the operations of an organization. The second part of malware is a particular malware called ransomware. And ransomware is unfortunately increasing. And this is really nasty. This is where you might have clicked on a link, you've downloaded some malware that infects your systems. It might lock up some of your data so that you can't use that data. And then you get contacted by the cyber criminal where they'll ask for a ransom to be paid. Sometimes they'll lock up your data. Other times they say, look, we've got your data and we're going to release it publicly and ask for a ransom that way. And we've seen ransomware attacks become really quite sophisticated, especially over the last 12 months. Criminals are likely to use phishing to get into your network. Maybe they hack someone's email account. Once they've got access to an email account, they will take their time and figure out, well, where are your servers? What type of servers are they? Where are your backups? So they're doing a lot of reconnaissance on your network to figure out what is the best way that they can then lock up that particular network. The ransoms are quite significant too. Last year we saw the average ransom now exceed about $40,000. And the third type of attack, which is becoming highly frequent at the moment, is business email compromise. We've seen a real surge in this in 2020, and so far this year, again, seeing a lot of activity in this space. And so this is essentially an email fraud that targets governments and institutions. And what happens here is if an attacker will use phishing techniques again to obtain somebody's credentials, they'll then use those credentials to access someone's email account. And once they've got access to the email account, again, they will take their time and figure out who's who in the organization. And what they're aiming to do is send off instructions to maybe a CFO to say, can you please pay this invoice? Or so-and-so's bank accounts have details, can you please pay an invoice? And that invoice is obviously fraudulent, and the money then goes out to the hacker. There's been numerous examples of this. There's an example on this slide here of Nico, who lost $29 million after an employee was tricked by scammers. Facebook was also compromised in this fashion early last year to the tune of about $120 million. That individual was arrested. And in our own experience, across the not-for-profit sector, we witnessed 3 organisations last year who unfortunately were compromised in this way and actually made payments through this method. Interestingly, AIG Insurance are now seeing more claims based on business email compromise than any other type of attack at the moment. Okay. So we've covered it very broadly, and Jane, keen to see if we have any questions around the landscape or an understanding of those sorts of threats before we move on to, well, how do we respond and what do we do about
them? Thanks, Ian. Just one question. So are there any particular types of businesses or organisations that are targeted more than others?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jane. So the answer is yes. We're seeing small to medium enterprises being targeted a lot. The reason for that is, an organisation that is smaller in size has less resources to defend against cyber attacks. So your ransomware attacks, criminals going after not tiny organisations, but certainly not large organisations who will make it difficult to get to pay ransoms. But certainly the small to medium sizes are hot to trot from that perspective. The other sector that's been targeted a lot is the healthcare sector, and this is predominantly because of the data that a health provider has. It's usually high quality data, contains a lot of personal information, and if that data is compromised, criminals can use that for identity theft and to launch a number of other attacks with greater ease. So they're probably the two that are hot at the moment.
Perfect, thank you. And that's all the questions we have at the moment, but everybody please do get your questions in to Ian and we'll answer them at the end of the webinar.
Yep. Beautiful. So now that we've covered off a little bit about what the attacks look like, we're going to delve into, as an organisation, what can you do about that? And just my slides have stopped. There we go. Okay, so actions to take. It's really important to understand that there is there's no silver bullet when it comes to how do we protect ourselves against cybersecurity. There never has been, and there won't be. It's a combination of using technology to make sure you have a strong security posture, but then also working with your teams to make sure they understand cybersecurity, and then from a governance perspective, how we manage the risk. So cybersecurity is not going away, and it's not a one-off project. It is something which needs to be considered on an ongoing basis. There are some really good tools, though, to help an organisation essentially build resilience, and that should be your goal when you think about cybersecurity. You will be compromised, there will be data breaches, and that's inevitable. It's a bit like someone breaking into your house. If they really want to, they're going to. It's very hard to stop that. But when you build resilience and have a posture that makes it more difficult for someone to break into your house, they're less likely to. And cybersecurity is very much the same. So if we think about the three actions that we recommend all organisations go through to build that resilience, the first one is cybersecurity. And cybersecurity is all about making it much harder for adversaries to compromise your systems. And a lot of this is very much technology based, and you should be having conversations with your managed service provider about how do we harden our systems to make sure that we are less vulnerable to attack than other organisations. The second thing to kick off, if you haven't already, is start developing safe data practices. So this is about what are your internal practices with the use of data? Where does it come from? How do we use it? When we're finished with it, how do we archive or dispose of that data? Things like how do we detect there's been a data breach? And quite importantly, how we're training our team around security awareness. And we'll go into some examples around that shortly. And the third area is security, information security governance. So this is about, as an organisation, what do we have in place to understand, well, where are our key assets? Where is our important information? How do we protect that? And how do we ensure that cybersecurity forms part of our risk management framework? So we'll delve through each of these in a little bit of detail. So we'll start with cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is really quite complex, and there's not necessarily a right and wrong. It's made complex because there are a number of frameworks and guidelines around it, and it's a moving feast. We see it changing constantly. Interestingly, the Australian Cybersecurity Centre have released a program called the Essential 8. And if you haven't heard about it, this is absolutely the best starting place when it comes to cybersecurity. So the ACSC has recognised that because cybersecurity is so complex, organisations were doing very little because they didn't know where to start. And so what they did was they developed, in their minds, the 8 essential cybersecurity strategies that you should put in place to reduce the chances of you being attacked. And we'll walk through these in some detail, but the first one is daily backups. And most of these are common sense, but we'll walk through them regardless. Daily backups is absolutely essential. It needs to happen across all of your systems, all of your data. And backups need to happen in a way that once the information is backed up, it should be stored externally, and that external repository should be disconnected from your network at the end of the backup. The reason that's really important is we're seeing cyber criminals now compromise a system. They're doing some reconnaissance on your network, and one of the things they like to do is encrypt your backups. They know if they encrypt your backups, you cannot recover, therefore you're more likely to pay a ransom. And if they can get to an external repository where you're storing your backups, they will also encrypt your offsite backups. So it's really important not only that you're backing up daily and that you're testing those backups, but then also when each backup finishes, it is disconnected from that external repository. Multi-factor authentication. Again, if you don't have this in place, you're running huge risks at the moment. It is the single most important thing to do to protect things like business email compromise. This is where when you log onto your email, for example, you get a secondary prompt to authenticate. And that might come through to an authentication app on your phone, where you're prompted to put in a PIN, and then it goes through to your email. Organisations that don't have multi-factor authentication in place are much, much more likely to be compromised. Attackers can jump on the web, hit your email using a web page, log on, and if they guess your password, or you've got if you've got a weak password, they can log on and they've got access to your email. Even if they've used phishing techniques and they've got access to your username and password, they can use that to log straight on. But if you've got multi-factor authentication in place, what will happen is when they log on, you'll get a prompt on your phone to say, you're trying to log on, please enter your code. And you'll obviously know that it's not you, and therefore know that something's up. So multi-factor authentication is an absolute critical must. The third area is patching operating systems. So this is Windows 7 on your computer or Windows 10. As there are vulnerabilities in the operating systems, Microsoft will release security patches for those. We saw this 2 weeks ago when Microsoft realized there was a vulnerability in their Exchange product, which is used for email. Now they got compromised first. We had 7,000 systems in Australia potentially compromised. Microsoft then released a security patch for Exchange, and it was reliant on managed service providers to go and implement that particular patch. And that stopped the attackers from actually compromising those systems any further. So that patching of operating systems is absolutely vital, needs to happen on at least a monthly basis and preferably weekly. The next one is restricting admin privileges. So if a criminal can get access to your administrative account, they've essentially got the keys to the kingdom. They can unlock servers, other computers, and wreak absolutely havoc. So it's really key that you make sure that users of your systems are given only the access they require to your system to do their job, and that any privileged access, like administrative accounts, are highly secured and only trusted with maybe a managed service provider or your internal IT department. User application hardening. This is looking at making sure that there's an approved set of applications that can run your network. So imagine you had a white list of applications and you say, you know what, on all of our computers, these are the 10 applications that are allowed to run. And if someone tries to run an application which is not these 10 applications, it's not going to run. It's a little bit harder to implement, but it's highly effective. And the reason it's highly effective is if an organization, if you're compromised using something like malware, that malware will try to run on your computer. And essentially, if that piece of software is not on your whitelist, there's a higher chance that it will fail to run and therefore fail to do the damage that it was designed to do. Configuring Microsoft Office and macro settings. So Microsoft Office can be used to distribute malware. If we think back to the attacks on Australia in June last year, the core of those attacks was using some malware called Emotet. And what that did was leverage Microsoft Office to spread the malware. And that spread using Word documents, Excel files, even PDF documents. That's what was used to spread the malware. So it's really important that you lock down Microsoft Office, and the Essential 8 provides some guidelines around, well, how do you do that as well. Patching applications, things like PDF viewers, or other applications, Adobe especially, whenever the vendor releases an update for that application to prevent it from being exploited, it's really important that you're patching those applications as well. So this is different to the operating systems like Windows 7 or Windows 10. You absolutely need to look at security patches for those applications. And lastly, application control, which is really about preventing certain applications from running, notably things like Flash. Adobe Flash can be used in many attacks. There's a number of applications which should be removed, if possible, from your systems. A couple of things to note here. When we talk about patching operating systems, it's really important that your organization is using supported operating systems. In 2020, Windows 7 became unsupported by Microsoft. I think it was late 2019. But what we saw last year was a significant, in fact, it was about 125% increase in attacks on Windows 7 computers, because cyber criminals realized that that software is no longer supported by Microsoft. Therefore, no one's going to be applying security patches. Therefore, whatever vulnerabilities are already built into Windows 7 are not going to change. Therefore, let's attack them. So we saw 125% increase in attacks against Windows 7. The other thing to be aware of is on the back of COVID last year, everyone started working from home. We were required to work from home. And a number of organizations were in a position where they didn't have company-owned laptops that everyone could take home. So they were allowing staff to use personal computers for a work purpose. And so last year we saw that personal computers, consumer products, were twice as likely to become infected with malware than company-owned computers. So keep that in mind as you're returning to the office this year. The more you can reduce people using non-company owned computers, the much more secure you're going to be. Now, the Essential 8, we've got a tool which we'll give you today, which you can use to self-assess yourself. And the way this works is, what you want to do is get some capabilities in place across all 8 areas. So you reach essentially maturity level 1, where you're partly aligned with the Essential 8. And once you've got all 8 areas partly aligned with the Essential 8, you can then go back and look at, okay, now we want to increase our backups, increase our application hardening, and then eventually just mature all 8 one by one right through to where you're fully compliant. Some of it is quite complex. It is a journey for many organizations who haven't started the Essential 8. It can take up to 6 months to go from when non-compliant with the Essential 8 to right through to fully compliant. Okay, so that's cybersecurity, and so that's all about hardening your systems and making them harder to be compromised. We're now going to look at safe data practices. So safe data practices are all about training your team to be aware of cybersecurity and to be developing some really solid practices around the treatment of data. So a couple of really interesting facts here. Social engineering, such as phishing, is the starting point for serious breaches. And if you think about last year, phishing URLs, so that is, please click on this link, and someone trying to obtain your personal information, that's called a phishing URL. They grew by 640% last year. So it's rampant. And the best way to mitigate that is security awareness training. So your team are the first line of defense. And what we're seeing is organizations that are investing in security awareness training are seeing a significant reduction on their team clicking through fraudulent emails and clicking through to dangerous sites. In fact, the 2020 Webroot threat report found that organizations are running 11 short security courses. These are 3 or 4 minute videos on a particular topic. So organizations running 11 or more of those over a 4 to 6 month period reduced click-through on phishing by 65%. So that's significant. The other thing to keep in mind here is, often we get asked, well, is human error such a big thing? Surely if we've got our firewalls in place and we're doing all the things on the Essential 8, we're not going to get compromised. The reality is no. You should absolutely still do the Essential 8, but you will still need to focus on data practices and security awareness for your team. There's a stat in the bottom left-hand corner there. The OAIC received 539 data breaches from July to December last year. 2 in 5 breaches were attributed to human error. So what they're saying here is 3 out of 5 stopped by following the Essential 8 and other cybersecurity practice, but 2 in 5 were just human error. And they're the ones that developing safe data practices are really going to make the biggest difference. So safe data practices is a little bit more than just security awareness training. But if you haven't started this journey, start with security awareness training because it will give you the greatest results as soon as possible. But once you get past that, there are a number of things that you can do. We're looking at safe use of data across projects. Where is data coming from? How is it used? How is it shared amongst your team? How are you publishing reports or data out to the public? And what happens to that data at the end of a project? We're also looking at things like data loss prevention. So if data's on a laptop or a mobile phone, they get stolen or lost, how do we deal with that? We're talking about how do we train our teams to be aware of data breaches, and then how do they respond to data breaches? And that thinking needs to follow the regulations in the Privacy Act and the Notifiable Data Breach Scheme. So there's a lot in safe data practices, but again, if you haven't started that journey, start with security awareness training. Okay, so the third area to focus on is security governance. And so some organizations will not follow this particular order. We're suggesting this particular order if you're coming from a low base in terms of cyber resilience. And that's because the Essential 8 will firm things up. Security awareness training will train your team. Once you've got those 2 in place, at least you've mitigated a lot of the risk. And then you can look at more broadly, well, as an organization, what are we doing from a governance perspective? If you're already well down the journey, you should be well into this information security governance side of things. What we're talking about here is making sure that as an organization, you've embedded cybersecurity into your risk management framework. Your leadership team should be talking about it. The audit risk committee should have it on their agenda. It should be in your risk registers. It should be flagged right up through to your board. So we really want to embed cybersecurity into your framework. You absolutely need to have very clear policies around privacy, information security, data loss preventions, backup and recovery. You need to have a data breach response plan and business continuity and disaster recovery, obviously. So those policies should be in place and they should be very clear and they should set the boundaries for how do you as an organization protect your information and your data, and how do you respond when there are breaches. Put cybersecurity insurance in place. Number 4 there is you want to be looking at the identity and value of your systems and making sure that they're documented. And what we mean here is you need to have a very clear view as to where are our data sets, where do they sit? Are they on our servers? Are they in the cloud? And who has, what data we're storing in them? So what data sets include personally identifiable information, and what other data sets are perhaps less key, if you like. And the reason you want to do that is you want to make sure that you're investing the most of your security around your assets which hold personally identifiable data and key company data. Because if they get compromised, that's where the most of the harm is done. And number 5 there, join the ACSC. There's a partnership program. It's free. You'll get access to threat alerts and ongoing advice to strengthen against cybersecurity. Again, this is not a project, it's an ongoing thing. So you need to get access to this information as the landscape changes. Okay. Do we have any questions around those 3 areas of action? And I know I've covered quite a lot there in a really short amount of time, but has anybody got any questions they want to ask?
We had one from Peter asking, it was about slide 13. How does one interpret the graph on slide 13, cybersecurity? It is not clear how the percentage scale for each of the essential 8 relates to the maturity level, particularly the blue bars. Is the maturity level per item or as a whole?
Yeah, great question, Peter. So the maturity level is across all 8. So, for example, you could do 7 of the 8 and have 7 of those really be quite mature. And if you're not doing backups at all and you score 0 on that, you are, on the whole, therefore not compliant. So it's the lowest common denominator. So if we look at this particular graph, this organisation scores really low on application control. They're at maturity level 1. As an organisation, that's where they are. And the next steps for that organisation would be to look at, okay, so what are the areas we need to get over 50%? And you can see if they get application hardening and their macros and their security patches and application control, those 4 things across the 50% line, then they're into that second maturity level where they're mostly aligned with the essential 8. Does that help, Peter?
Yeah. Yep. So there's another question. So what steps do we need to take if we have been compromised?
That's a great question. Okay, so got a slide here somewhere. Cool. So if you have been compromised, there's a number of things you can do, and this information has been taken from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, and so it's really key. I know they've got sort of 8 recommendations here. We'll start at the top, but firstly, have a look if your organisation has been caught in a data breach. There is a website called Have I Been Pawned? You can jump into that website, type in the name of your organisation, and see if you have been caught up in some sort of data breach, or whether your accounts have been compromised and you might have some identity theft occurring there. If you've been compromised, the first thing to do is reset the passwords for affected users as a precaution. If you suspect, in the case of business mail compromise, that it's more than one person, if it's 2 or 3, it's probably something broader going on, and you might want to organisation-wide reset everyone's passwords. That can be really quite disruptive, but it's a great precaution to take. We had this situation with an organisation in January where they were one of their email accounts was compromised through a poorly chosen password from one of their users, and across 1,600 employees, they chose to reset everyone's passwords. So reset the passwords for any affected user. Make sure you reach out to those individuals, because often people will use the same password at work as they do for something else. So if their username and password is now known by a criminal, you want to make sure they're aware of that so they can reset other passwords outside of the company password. Individuals can also check whether their accounts have been compromised on the Have I Been Pawned website. You can get a list there of what information of yours has been compromised. They're the immediate steps to take. Change your passwords, reach out to users that are impacted, and after that, it really comes back to go back to the Essential 8. You need to have the multi-factor authentication enabled. Implementing a policy where staff do not use their work credentials outside of work on any other for any other activities is really quite helpful. Go through the Essential 8. The ACSC has a number of recommendations around protecting web applications. You can go through those pages and they'll guide you through how you can secure your systems. And then circle back to the Essential 8. Also, if you have an IT team, have them look at a thing called Pastebin. So there are on the dark web places where usernames and passwords are stored, and your ICT staff can look at something like Pastebin and see if there are credentials there which can be further used to compromise people's systems. So there's a lot of steps there from the ACSC, but really if you've had a breach, it's really reset your passwords, have a chat with those who have been compromised, and then go back to, okay, so how do we get breached and what do we need to do? If it's the Essential 8, go back and start working with the Essential 8. If you've already got all that in place and you're quite mature and you're still being compromised, you've probably got some deficiencies around the security awareness training for your team.
Thank you. Do you have a link for people to book in for a quick call or a bit of a one-on-one?
Yeah, there's two things which I think people will find really helpful. Depending on where you are with the journey, if you're starting from a low base in terms of security posture, start with the Essential 8. There's a tool that we have developed. It's free. Jane, I know you'll send out this information pack at the end of the web event. So click on the link, go through to the tool. The tool will take you about 15 minutes. It is slightly technical. It will walk you through each of the 8 modules of the Essential 8. And there's a short video at the beginning of each module that explains, what is application management about and how do you score yourself. So it's self-paced, but walk through it. It'll take you 15 to 20 minutes. At the end of that, we'll get the results. We'll pull together a report for you that tells you what level of compliance you are at with the Essential 8 and what steps you need to take to move from wherever you are to that next level of compliance. The thing with this tool is just be purely honest, just be brutally honest. Even if you're unsure, just answer unsure, and you might get a non-compliant for that particular area, but at least then you'll then get the advice to know, well, what do we do to move up and improve our maturity. If you do nothing else today from this web event, use the tool. The other part of steps to take today is number 2 is deliver the security awareness training. And there's a number of ways to do this training. The way that we see works best is to do it on an ongoing basis. So we can provide a series of videos around cybersecurity designed for end users to help educate them about how to stay safe, how to detect a breach, how to spot phishing emails, those sorts of things. But what we do with security awareness training is we actually send out a fake campaign. So we'd actually send out a phishing email to your organization and see who clicks through and who provides credentials. It's perfectly safe, it all comes back to us. But then we can provide you with a report that says, out of your out of your team, 60% of your team actually clicked through and provided credentials. And then off the back of that, we know which videos, educational videos, should be provided. And then by doing those phishing campaigns, 3 or 4 times a year, what you'll start to see, as long as you're educating your team, is the click-throughs are far less. The other thing which is really helpful with the security awareness training is it's a great tool to use when you're onboarding new staff. It's part of the HR process to say it's mandatory that you go through and watch these 10 videos on cybersecurity. And again, we can give you reports back then on, or out of our staff, who's actually watched these videos, who hasn't. So you've got some sort of mechanism to report back to your leadership teams or audit and risk committees. So they're the best places to start. If you're already well into those, start to dig deep on safe data practices and building out your policies. And what I'd suggest is, if nothing else, do the self-assessment with the Essential 8. If you want to have a chat to us about the security awareness training, or you want to have a chat about you're not really quite sure where to begin, maybe you've done a number of things, but there's still gaps, you're not sure how do you fill those gaps, book a call with our team. We're here to help. We work 100% with the non-for-profit and social enterprise sector. Book a call with us. We'll spend 15 minutes trying to understand, well, where are your gaps? What are you trying to achieve? And we can come back with a bit of a plan of action from there.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ian. And as Ian just said, you will be receiving all that information and these slides and the recording towards the end of today. And all the
Just lost you, Jane.
Sorry, I'm back now. I'm just sending the link to everybody here, but as I said, you'll all be receiving a copy of these slides and all the information in an email towards the end of today. So thank you very much, Ian. That was really good information, and thank you everybody for joining us today. And do get in contact with Ian and Human IT if you have any questions at all. The information links are just up there with the website and email. So thank you. Thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll see everybody again very soon. And please do take a couple of minutes to fill in the survey that will just be popping up soon. Thank you, Ian. Have a good day, everybody.
Beautiful. Thanks, Jane. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, bye-bye.